everyone, and welcome to week 4. I hope you had some enlightening discussions last week about our topic, identity. This week, we're going to talk about the third pillar of a biblical worldview, the question of authority. Pastor Tim Keller notes, the individual quest for autonomous expression and fulfillment is the driving value of our Western culture. Our culture promotes the belief that each person is in charge of their own life, and that they are the final authority on every decision they make. Today, Pastor Darren will describe a biblical answer to the current cultural value of autonomy. We were made to know God first and foremost, and to find our meaning in reference to Him. God is the center. Today, we're going to listen to 3 clips from Pastor Darren's sermon, and then take time to discuss the Bible's teaching on authority. Have a great evening.
Now, my wife Jan and I have 4 children. They're pretty well all grown now, and most of them married. But sometimes my oldest daughter, Natalie, will be on the stage as part of our worship team. Natalie loves to sing, and I've always loved to listen to her sing. Ever since she was a little girl, she would just belt out at the top of her voice songs wherever she was. And I remember once driving in our van, and she was sitting in her car seat behind me. She couldn't have been any more than about 4 years old. And she's sitting behind me, and she's singing a song at the top of her lungs, and I'm just enjoying listening to her sing, except the lyrics she was singing was wrong. She wasn't singing the right words, and this bothered me as a perfectionist. So I listened to her and I said, Natalie, I love to hear you sing, but you know something, honey? The words you sang weren't the right words. And she says, Daddy, I sing it my own way. That's not a surprise from a little girl whose favorite phrase all her life was, "You're not the boss of me." May I ask you something this morning? Who is the boss of you? Who has the right to say no to you? Does anyone have moral authority in your life? If they do, where did they get that authority? If no one has moral authority in your life, then how do you make your moral decisions? How do you decide or discern what's right and what's wrong in life? On what grounds do you pronounce your moral judgments? Oh, and don't try to tell me that you don't make moral judgments. Come on. Every time you say, that's not fair, you're making a moral judgment. Every time you say, well, that's unjust, you're making a moral judgment. Every time you say, that's just plain cruel, you're making a moral judgment. Every time you say, that's intolerant, you're making a moral judgment. And by the way, if over the last minute you thought to yourself, I don't make moral judgments, and this bald-headed preacher up there shouldn't be standing there accusing me of making moral judgments. If you thought that, you just made a moral judgment. So when you make your moral judgments, on what basis are you making them? On what grounds are you staking your claim? Who or what is the source of moral authority in your life? Who is the boss of you? I once spoke at a high school assembly not too long ago on the topic of human sexuality. I was invited to come and speak to this topic to the high school students. In my presentation, I outlined the biblical view, and I taught that sex is designed to be experienced only in the safe confines of a marriage between one man and one woman. Immediately after I finished and the assembly was dismissed, a group of students approached me, circled me actually, and they asked if I would be willing to attend a question and answer session later that day. They said that it was for any students who wanted to follow up on what I had to say in my presentation that morning. I said, sure, sounds great, let's do it. So a couple hours later, I returned to the school and went to the classroom that they told me to go to, and I met the teacher at the door who was overseeing this gathering. And in the room were, I'd say, maybe 20, 25 students, even a parent who had come wanting to interact after my presentation. And I'll just say that the what's the word I'm looking for? The sense in the room was tense, put it that way. And the very first question I was asked at that gathering was the question that you and I are pondering today. A student calmly, politely, but firmly looked me in the eye and said, "What gives you the right to say what you said? Who are you to declare what is and what is not acceptable when it comes to human sexuality?" And the next hour was a clash of worldviews. The next hour was a polite but heated debate over the question of authority, the question we're going to deal with today. Now, there are all kinds of religions. There are all kinds of philosophies. There are all kinds of moral theories out there. But when you scratch beneath the surface, they can all be traced to one of the following three sources that I've placed on your outline this morning. First of all, there's what I'll call the secular view, and I'll explain that in a moment. Then there's the Eastern view, and I'll explain that, and the biblical view. Secular, Eastern, and biblical. Now, by secular, I mean that represents atheism, materialism, naturalism, secular humanism. By Eastern, there I'm compiling all the Eastern religions, all the Eastern mysticism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, Transcendental Meditation, Oprah. And then there's the biblical view. By biblical, that represents Judaism, Christianity, and on the fringe, I suppose you could put Islam in there as well, though that's on the outer fringe. So let's look quickly at these three views and how they address the issue in the question of authority. Now, the secular view says this: there is no God. That's the secular view. There's no God. This view claims that the material realm is the only realm that exists. Remember, we touched on this a bit last week. The secular view says there is no God, and all that exists is the physical realm. You are a bag of chemicals charged with electricity, and you're nothing more. When you're dead, you're dead. You don't exist beyond the grave. Everything that's physical, that's all that there is. According to this view, you create your own meaning. According to this view, as your outline says, you create your own meaning. You have to create your own meaning in life because according to this worldview, you live, then you die, and nothing ultimately lasts, nothing ultimately matters. I mean, it doesn't matter what you do today or what you did yesterday because in the end, you're going to be dead, no one's going to care because no one will exist, and our universe is going to be end up just expanding and then freezing, or it's going to recontract again and just explode. So it doesn't matter. Ultimately, it doesn't matter what you say or do or what anyone says or does. According to the secular view, you create your own meaning. This month's Maclean's magazine came out, and there's a tragic cover story about a Canadian couple, a gentleman, a billionaire businessman and his wife, and how they were terribly murdered in their home. And there's several pages on this couple, and particularly about this man and about his life. And I came across this phrase as I was reading it, and it jumped out at me. It says this: describing this businessman, the author of the article wrote this, and I quote, Sherman, the name of the businessman, says, Sherman, a self-described atheist, wrote in his own biography, and I quote the businessman, he said, I have always felt a disdain for organized religion. Life has no meaning and no purpose. See, that businessman was not being a pessimist. He was simply facing head on. He was being honest with the byproduct of his atheism. If there is no God, if there is no afterlife, we're just a bag of chemicals, and life in itself has no meaning and no purpose. You've got to create your own meaning. The secular worldview claims that there is no God, but the Eastern worldview makes a radically different claim. According to the Eastern worldview, you are God. Whoa, that's different. Yeah, according to the Eastern worldview, you are God. Now, many people don't realize this. When they hear in Eastern religions God, they think, oh, God like we think of God. No, 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 no. According to the Eastern thought, God is not a personal being. In Eastern thought, God doesn't have a mind or emotions or a will. God doesn't speak. God, according to the Eastern thought, is an impersonal force, an energy that permeates the universe, like the current that's flowing through the wall sockets in your home. You see, for the Eastern thinker, the purpose of life is to become one with this universal energy. And you do this, you become one with the universal energy by breaking through the illusion that you actually exist. According to the Eastern way of thinking, you don't exist. You don't exist, according to Eastern thought. I love the joke the philosophers talk about this guy in a philosophy class who was struggling with this, and he was reading Descartes and these philosophers who claim that we don't exist, and he ran into the philosopher's office. He said, "Doctor, professor, please tell me, I need to know, do I exist?" And the professor said, "Who wants to know?" You see, it doesn't make sense when you get right down to it to say you don't exist, but that's Eastern thought when you get right down to it. You think you exist, but you don't actually exist as an individual. You and I and everyone and everything are actually one and the same. For the Eastern thinker, everything is one, and everything and everyone is God. A few years ago, I found myself sitting on a plane with a couple from Seattle who believed this very thing. They were big into this Eastern thought. I was squeezed in a back row on a long flight from Vancouver to ultimately Bangladesh. With this couple, they were heading to India to spend a few months with their guru. They were in their 60s, and they had been following this guru for decades now, and every year, as I remember it, they would go and spend a month or two living with their guru. And so I didn't tell them who I was or what I did, but I spent several hours probing them and asking questions about their worldview. I understood Eastern thought, and I wanted to see if they really believed this stuff. And so I was acting like a seeker, and I was asking a bunch of questions. And every answer she would give me, because it was mostly her and I speaking, she would say, "Look within, Darren. Look within. The answer is within. The answer to everything is within you." And I said, "Well, what if I look within and all I see is darkness?" "Look deeper, Darren." She said, "You need to look within, and you need to realize the truth, Darren, that you are God." Now, I didn't say it, but my first thought was, hey, if I was God, I'd be in first class right now. But after a few hours of discussing her worldview, I asked her if she could do me a favor. I said, "Listen, do you have direct access to your guru? I mean, can you ask your guru questions?" She said, "Of course, that's why we go, to have our questions answered." I said, "Great. Here's my business card," and I gave her my card. I said, "Here's my email address. Can I give you a question that you ask your guru, and then can you email me back with his answer?" She said, "What's your question?" I said, "Ask your guru this. Say, 'Guru, if I don't exist,' and that's what I'm being taught, 'if I don't exist, then why did I travel all the way to India to give you a few months of my time and a few thousand of my dollars, trying to understand the reason for my existence? If I don't exist, why am I doing this again?'" Maybe she lost my email address, but it's been 7 years and I'm still waiting for the answer to that question. Okay, let's quickly review. The secular view is there is no God, and life is all about creating your own meaning and purpose. The Eastern worldview is, hey, no, you are God, and life is all about realizing that you don't actually exist. Now, here's the thing. What I find amazing is, as different as these first two worldviews are, when it comes to the question we're dealing with today, the question of authority, these two worldviews, the secular thinker and the Eastern thinker, are actually in absolute agreement. Both the secular and the Eastern thinkers deny the existence of a personal God. Both deny the existence of a God to whom you can pray and with whom you can have a relationship. Both views agree that there's no God out there, so to speak. That means that they are both left with only one place to look when it comes to their source of moral authority. If there's nothing out there, the only place left to look is in here. And so both the secular and the Eastern thinker find the source of their moral authority within themselves. They look inside themselves for their sense of morality. Now, does anyone else see a problem with this approach? Does anyone else see the problem with looking within yourself to find the source of your moral authority? I see a few problems with this approach, but let me point out just two of them. Looking within yourself for your source of moral authority is like being dumped in the heart of a dark, thick jungle, being handed a compass, and being assigned the task of finding your way out, except with one catch. Your compass always points to yourself. How reliable do you think a compass like that would be? And you're thinking, oh, no problem, Darren. I'll compare my compass with the compass of the person beside me and the people around me. We'll compare compasses. Okay, well, that actually leads to the second big problem with this view as I see it. Just like your compass will always point to you, their compass will always point to them. So who decides which compass is the correct compass? See, as you can see, for the secular and the Eastern thinker, the answer to the question of authority is a highly subjective question. You find the answer, and it's a highly subjective answer, and you find the answer to the question of authority within yourself. So for those who hold to these worldviews, moral authority is based upon what you think and what you feel. So when you get right down to it, the secular and the Eastern answer to the question, who is the boss of me, is this. You're the boss of you. I'm the boss of me. It's my daughter's answer. It's a 4-year-old child's answer. You're not the boss of me. I'm the boss of me. You are the boss of you. That's the secular and the Eastern answer to the question of authority. You are the boss of you. In a world like that, there are no moral absolutes. In a world like that, nothing is truly right or wrong, good or evil. In a world like that, morality is simply a matter of personal opinion. In a world like that, things can be labeled right or wrong, good or evil. Oh, and I'm not saying that you can't act morally by holding a secular or Eastern view. Of course they can act morally. I know some atheists who are very moral, upstanding people. I know Hindus who are very upstanding and moral people. I'm not saying you can't act morally. I'm simply saying that you cannot have something that is truly right or wrong, good or evil. It's just your opinion at that moment. Things can be labeled right or wrong, and you can live according to those labels, but the label can change from person to person, culture to culture, moment to moment. What does the biblical option, where does it get its moral authority? Excuse me. The tempting answer would be to say, well, the Bible, of course, duh. But that wouldn't be true. Not entirely. The Bible may be the vehicle through which that authority is delivered, but the Bible itself is not the source of that authority. The Bible is just the messenger. The Bible is not the source of the message. The source of authority in the biblical option is found in how this worldview addresses the God issue. You see, The secular option says there's no God. The Eastern option says, no, you are God. The biblical option says there is a creator God. There is a creator God. And the biblical option recognizes the existence of a personal God, meaning a God with thoughts, emotions, a will, a God that communicates, a God that desires relationship. The biblical option recognizes that this personal God created the world, created the universe. That means that everything belongs to him. It's God's world. God designed it, God created it, God owns it, God is the one in charge of it. The world is under God's authority. That's the biblical option. And that includes moral authority. Who's the boss of me? According to the biblical worldview, the answer to this question of authority is crystal clear. God is the boss of you. That's who. It's a simple answer. God is the boss of you. He created you. He created the universe. He's the boss. Throughout the Bible, God is constantly exercising his moral authority through his prophets, especially in the Old Testament. One example is what's a minor prophet. The Bible has major prophets and minor prophets. What's the difference? Major prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, they're larger, thicker books. The minor prophets are just a couple pages, just smaller books. One of the minor prophets is a prophet named Micah. And in Micah chapter 6, verse 8, it says this. Listen as God's exercising moral authority. It says this, "He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you?" Here it is, "to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." Now look at that passage and see how it's just overflowing with the moral authority. He, God, has shown you, he's revealed, he's made clear to you, O mortal, meaning finite creature, the infinite eternal God, Creator God, says to you, O mere mortal. So let's get this understanding clear. I'm the creator, you're the created. I'm eternal, you're a thing. Let's get our classifications clear. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. He's laid out to you what is good and evil, right and wrong. And what does the Lord require of you? Who's the boss? God's the boss. And here's what he requires: to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with him. Now, we could leave it at that, but that would leave room for some confusion. And in the culture, the world that you and I live in today, we need to actually be even clearer here. I'll show you what I mean. And here's where you really are going to need to do some thinking with me. And trust me, some people have tried to push me into the corner I'm about to push you into. People say, okay, Darren, you say that God, you look to God as your moral authority. Fine, but tell me something. Is something good because God says it's good? Or is something good because it's simply good in itself? See that question on the screen? Is something good because God says it's good? Or is something good because it's simply good in itself? Think very carefully about this. How would you respond? If you say that something is good because God says it's good, then that means that God could change his mind. God says today, murdering innocent people is evil, it's wrong, thou shalt not. But God could wake up tomorrow morning, have a Starbucks coffee, and say, you know something? Murder's good today. I'm feeling in a murdering mood. And I'm saying that from now on, murdering innocent people, 2 thumbs up. I've changed my mind. It's my prerogative. I'm God. If something is good just because God says it's good, that means that the biblical view is no different than the other 2 views. If God can change his mind when it comes to what is good and evil, that means that nothing is really right or wrong, good or evil. It's just about God's opinion at any given moment. If something is good just because God says it's good, morality is just as subjective and unpredictable in the biblical view as it is in the Eastern and the secular views. Well, clearly that can't be right. So could it be the second possibility presented here is the right one? Could it be that things are good just because they are good? Could it be that some things are just good in themselves? They're just good, that's it. Just like red is just red and blue is just blue, good is just good. Actually, this has its own set of problems. If you say that something is good because it's just good in itself, then you're saying that God has nothing to do with it. You would be saying that goodness is a standard that exists apart from God, external from God, independent of God. And that would mean that goodness is something that's actually above God, judging God. God himself would only be good if he measures up to this external standard of goodness. That means that this standard of goodness would actually be God. Well, that can't be right either. Okay, it looks like we're trapped here, doesn't it? We are. I'm done. Bow your heads. No, I'm just kidding. We're not trapped. It's a false dilemma. There's a third option. And this third option lies at the heart of today's big question. This third option is the foundation to the question of morality and authority. Something is not good because God says it's good. Neither is something good because it's simply good in itself. So what is the foundation of moral authority in the biblical view? Something is good and moral if it measures up to God's moral nature. God is good. That is God's moral nature. Goodness is who God is. Goodness is what God is. God's moral commands are grounded in God's moral nature. Let me simplify it and put it to you this way. This is our big idea for the day, where we sum up the teaching in one simple phrase. Here it is. What God says flows out of who God is. What God says is grounded in or flows out of who God is. You see, when God gives us moral commands, these aren't things that he's just randomly making up on the spot as his opinion. No, neither are they based, his commands are not based on some external standard that he himself is obeying. No, when God gives us moral commands, they are grounded in and flow from within him, from his very nature. What God says flows out of who God is.
Hi, and welcome to the third night of Life's Big Questions, our worldview series, where we've been talking about the pillars of a Christian worldview and how that makes a difference in our lives every day. Tonight we're going to be talking about the issue of authority. How do we make the decisions we make in our life? Really, who do we appeal to as our final court? Are we really totally free agents? Like, how does that all work? So tonight's topic is going to be about this whole issue of what is the authority that guides my life and decision making.
Mick, have you noticed that we've been wearing the same clothes for 3 weeks?
I noticed that.
Yeah, but I'd throw that out
it's
there.
a great sweater.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I really like it.
I'm liking your shirt
It works
too.
for me.
Okay.
So Darren, where does the culturally prevalent notions that it's my life and I'll do it my way, where does that have its roots?
You know, we could say the Enlightenment or something like that, but the truth is, my children didn't study the Enlightenment, yet they all, when they were little kids, their favorite phrase was, "You're not the boss of me." So they didn't get that from Voltaire, or, you know, that where did they get it from? Well, they got it from their mother. That's where they got it. And she got it from her mother and so on, because it's part of the sinful nature.
Yeah.
The very first question ever asked in the Bible was, did God really say? That's what the serpent said to Eve in the garden. Did God really say you're not allowed? So in other words, questioning the authority of the Creator. It's in the sinful nature. It's the core of rebellion is, God, you're not the boss of me.
Mm-hmm. So if God is the boss of you and his way is the best way for you, does submitting to God's will take away my ability and my responsibility to make choices?
What people forget is submission itself is a choice. You have to choose to submit. It's not our default position. As fallen creatures, our default is, no, to do it my way and to rule my own life, to be the boss of myself. So submission is a choice to go against the grain of my fallen nature and to choose a different pathway. So submission itself is not the abdication of choice. It is a choice in itself.
But at the same time, as we make that choice, submission is not a really politically correct point of view in our culture. And so how can submission be a good thing? Like, how do we frame that?
Yeah. So submission, when you make choices, we gauge our choices by the results of those choices. So we consider a bad choice something that leads down a bad path or brings bad results, and a good choice would be a choice that leads to benefits. Mm-hmm. Well, if you think about this, so wouldn't it be the best choice to submit your life, meaning to follow the guidelines and the advice of the one who created you, designed you, is all-powerful and all-knowing? So in other words, you buy a product and it says how to assemble it, and you say to yourself, I don't need no stupid instructions. Those are for losers. I'm going to assemble this how I want. I'll do it my way. I've got my own way of assembling this thing. You could do that. Or you could choose to follow the instructions of the people who made it, designed it, created it, and know what's best for it. And you may say, yeah, well, Darren, but I am very intelligent and I'm actually smarter than the people who made it. That actually might be true. I'll grant you that. But that's not applicable when it comes to us and God, because God is all-knowing. And so he knows every possible connection. He knows every possible direction that a life could take, and he has the best for you. So you can't outsmart God. You can't outthink God. So you would be wise. I think it'd be the smartest choice to submit your life to the one who made you, designed you, and knows everything about you and the future.
It sounds like trust plays a big role here.
You're trusting the one who made you and knows everything and is all-powerful. Absolutely. And I don't think it's a huge leap of trust to do that. I think that's a pretty simple trust step.
Yeah. And so, people put trust in all kinds of different things. Who is really trustworthy? God is trustworthy. Some of the other sources, maybe not so much.
Exactly.
Okay. So tonight we've been talking about authority, or who's the boss of me, and deal with this issue of what is it that really allows us to make great decisions in life and to live a life of purpose and meaning. And we've established the fact that God's will, who cares for us more than we can possibly imagine, really is the best design for our human living. Next week, we're going to come back and talk about the last pillar of our Christian worldview, which is the whole issue of destiny and what does it mean to live with the end in view. And so we look forward to seeing you again next week.
I'm going to wear the sweater again. I'm liking it.
Okay, I'll do the same.